So, interesting conversation about salary equity. Okay, so this is so delicious right now. I can't even. Okay. Sometimes I get all riled up, right? And I'm like in that space where I'm like, okay, let's work on the salary. This is the increase it needs, and so on and so forth. And there's a time for that kind of passion. Right now, it's not that time. Right now, in this particular portion of the conversation, it's we got to take a more detached look and sort of observe the state of affairs more like a Vulcan than like a Klingon. And one of the things that just came out, so I read an article in Science. What they found was that fewer US scientists are pursuing postdoc positions in academia. Okay. So they are opting to not go into their postdoc fellowships and instead go straight into industry. Okay. Now, this is actually fascinating on many, many levels. Okay. So about like, I don't know, sometime in the last year or so, and my memory isn't great, but I know it was sometime in the last year or so. We all had this conversation. Many people were having the conversation about the research fellows and check because the NIH had increased the salary, salary minimum for them by a significant amount, right? And so all of the institutions had to kind of go through and just figure out where they were at and then increase as necessary. And obviously you don't need to decrease, right? And some institutions were fine because they already had put systems in place to create greater equity among academic scholars on the career track. And then others had to go through and figure out, okay, how to, salary increases and do what needed to be done. Okay. Now, where this came from, right, was that the NSF noticed that there was a significant dip in US postdocs, especially in biological and biomedical sciences. 8% drop in a single year. Okay. Now, the interesting things about this is that postdoc on temporary visas rose 6%. Okay. So the institutions across the country now were starting to lose talent. Okay. Which started to spark real concern, enough concern that the NSF had to study it to figure out, hey, what's happening? So when the NSF dug deeper, it was evident that the actual culprit of all of this were the salaries. Okay. So biotech companies were luring early career scientists to their organizations because they were offering better pay. Now, here's the thing. Not a single person who is in biotech or in the biological and biomedical sciences is surprised to hear this. Like we knew that this was happening, right? But now it was evident on a leadership and systemic scale, right? When you have 6% of temporary visas increasing, which means people are coming from outside the country to do their postdoc positions here, and then you have 8% of US people opting not to do the postdoc, right? So the problem to respond to this was that they basically proposed a hike in the minimum postdoc salary last December, right? Which they also had improved benefits and professional development, to your point, Kelly, and more opportunities for them to grow within academia, right? So what's really interesting, though, is that kind of mirrors what's happening in research administration as well, right? We're finding that a lot of people are ditching research administration altogether. They're going into consulting, they're going into industry, or they're leaving one organization to go to another organization, to another organization, to another organization, or they're going off to do their own thing. But we are finding that there is a reduction in the amount of people who want to do this job, right? Now, even though that's the case, there's no national outcry for research administrators' pay like there was for the fellows, right? As part of this, I was like, okay, because I've been looking at the salaries for all the positions being posted, and I dove into NCURA's resources, and our salary rates are dishearteningly low, okay? And I think a lot of us know that we're being underpaid for the work that we're doing, right? And ultimately, the exodus will continue until the cost of inaction becomes too great, right? So the question that I have is sort of like, how do we as collectively start to, like, the organizations that are currently responsible for our PR in the world, like NCURA, SRA, and others, how do we reframe our roles and push for salaries that reflect our work's complexity, right? Which for many of us, we are a C-suite in training, right? The second you're hiring someone on as a research administrator, the kind of strategic things that we need to be aware of is very, very high level. even if we don't know anything about research administration in that moment when someone is hired, we are saying you are going to be someone who excels in this role, right? And it's not just a conversation that's so this is a conversation. What's interesting is that anyone at the director level and below who is in research administration is actually already having this conversation, right? I've had it with hundreds of research administrators across the country at various, NCURA and SRA and local events. We're all talking about it on the ground, right? I'm not sure what's happening at the VP level, to be perfectly honest, right? Because the general conversation seems to be that there is a strong disconnect between what is needed to maintain a strong research administrative department and what is being actualized at the VP and strategic level, right? So, what I do know though, so I don't know that part, but I do know this, that the organizations and institutions, right, that increase pay for their RAs, that allow their budgets to adequately reflect their desires to grow their research portfolios and allow for remote and flex work schedules, those are going to be the ones that climb out of the vacancy pit of despair first. Our tax come back, because those changes in perspective, they also typically bring with them other shifts that telegraph that an organization is a place that people really want to work. Friends will be calling their friends and be like, hey, you should come join me here. This is a great place. We have blah, we have blah, we have blah. And it's just going to be a matter of time at that point before the other organizations either start doing the same thing or they figure out that they're not able to keep up with the research workload. And then they have to decide if they're in fact research institutions or if they're just organizations that have some grants, right? And I think that's going to be up to every organization to decide.